Hi, this is Sam, and this is my first submission as an associate trainer with Art2Ride, and I'm here with my horse, Legacy. I'll introduce Legacy and his story in a second here, but we've started right up with the work in hand, and I just want to comment on that for a second. So, the purpose of the work in hand is to essentially ride from the ground, just like we would in the lunging. The whip is acting as my leg, and my goal here is to ask the horse to step forward and laterally off my whip and into my outside rein, just like I would ask him when I ride. And you'll see when I get to the lunging in a few minutes that I use an analogous set of aids, and of course, these transfer into the work under saddle as well. So, in the next few minutes of the work in hand, you'll see that Legacy does a pretty good job of stepping forward and underneath his body in response to the whip, and he's stretching nicely and fairly evenly into the contact, which is great for him. I was pretty pleased this day with the work in hand. I would say we have had better days, but my goal today was really just to maintain relaxation in the work in hand while also establishing that inside leg to outside ring connection. Because we had a pretty full workout session today for the fitness level he's at currently, and I wanted to keep his eager and relaxed attitude all the way through, I used the work in hand today just to establish that relaxed mindset and the inside leg to outside rein connection, and of course the stretch over the back that you see. Now, the one thing that looking at this video now I would really like to have done better is to establish more activity in the walk. I am pleased with his attitude and his willingness to stay within the aids, but I think he is quite capable of a bigger stride, stepping further underneath his body with more purpose and precision here. And, that said, part of the reason I kept the energy of this work in hand portion on the lower side of optimal is that this relaxed and quite willing attitude is really a huge accomplishment for this horse. I adopted Legacy from a rescue, actually just one exit up the freeway from Art2Ride in San Diego. The rescue is called Falcon Ridge, and I met Legacy in the summer of 2015, so about 3 years ago now. At that time, he had been seized from a very severely physically abusive situation where he was for the first 14 or 15 years of his life, and he was trained to show in the Arabian halter classes via electrocution by a cattle prod, and as you can imagine, several other very egregious methods of physical abuse designed to induce just absolute panic in the horse in a manner that was really winning in the show ring, unfortunately. This particular discipline of the halter Arab showing is really one that tends to create and reward, tortures like this. Coming from that horrid situation, Legacy was extraordinarily damaged. He had become aggressive in a way that was deemed by many to be hopeless and just totally untrainable. When I got him, he would kick and strike out, rear and bite. It was aggression born of trauma, and it has taken years to rehabilitate him to where he's at now. Of course, we have so much further to go, but this horse has really come along in ways where, you look back at where you come from and you just can't believe it. Progress can at times seem tedious or non-existent for periods. But if there's anything I have learned from this horse, it is to step back every once in a while and appreciate your starting point and let that be your inspiration and reason to believe in moving forward. So I'm sure you can imagine when I started the work in hand with this horse, it was extremely difficult. I had to start from below zero with him in terms of touching any part of his body. He would react violently, striking out to human touch, and it was thousands of hours of desensitization and patience and 3 steps forward and 2 steps back. And, I remember the day actually when I picked up his back foot for the first time and I was so excited. This was such a huge accomplishment for both of us that I had my mom run over. I called her, said, "Mom, like, come take a photo." I had her take a photo of that day, me picking up his back foot, and I think that was maybe 6 or 7 months into his rehabilitation training that I was able to do that. So you can imagine, the amount of time and work it took to get to that point. It taking 7 months just to be able to pick up the back foot in relaxation. And so, understandably, when we started the work in hand, it was a huge deal for him just to communicate to him that me asking him to move with a whip in my hand was not going to turn into anything painful or scary, and that he could trust me while also, following me as his leader. It really took, I'd say, like a year and a half or maybe more before I could confidently say we could get through one of these work in hand sessions without him actually striking out or having one of his episodes where he sort of breaks down and forgets where he is and just reverts back into that traumatized and aggressive state. So, overall, even though the work in hand today wasn't perfect, I was really quite happy with his body language and attitude and the way he maintains sensitivity to the aids without overreacting. This is always a super fine line for this horse in the training, maintaining that natural sensitivity without allowing him to overreact. So I think I've started blabbing on here into the lunging session, but just to note, I gave him his cookie as he expected at the end of the work in hand session, just as Will says, there's got to be something in it for them, as always. And we've moved on to the lunging here, and I cut out a few of the first few minutes of this actually because he was just stopping to pee or poop a few times, and then I guess decided, he was camera shy and couldn't do it while being filmed, and we moved on with the work. So again, I was happy with the walk, and although it could have been a little more active, I always have to keep in mind with this horse that he is also very physically damaged by his past, and so a big, active, swinging stride in the walk is difficult for him, and I try to stay as patient as I can with gradually developing the walk and allowing him to loosen up new and old tension. He's got some lower back pain, a hunter's bump sort of deal where he's got one tubercocci higher than the other and arthritis in his knees and such. And so, a lot of it is just about patiently opening up that stride until it's really swinging over the back. So again, I'll point out here that just like in the work in hand, the goal of the lunging is to essentially ride from the ground. So the whip is acting as my inside leg aid, and he is stepping deeply under his center of mass, activating his abdominal muscles and lifting the lumbar spine and stretching over his back into the contact that you see I have there with the lunge line. And he does this quite eagerly and pretty fluidly because as he has progressed in the training, he has really come to enjoy stretching, and so we see a nice walk has developed here after the work in hand. And as we move on into the trot, you'll notice that I'm not focused entirely on him developing a perfect stretch immediately. With him, the first thing I want is that activity and swing behind. If he's got his neck at neutral or a bit up or wherever he needs to start out with, I'm not too worried as long as he doesn't go completely inverted. The risk with asking for the stretch right away in the beginning is that with this horse, he knows his job, right? He knows he's to go into this nice stretchy trot on the lunge and he enjoys it. So if I ask him to stretch the nose down to the floor right away, we run into the problem of compromising the quality of the gait in order to get the stretch, and that would really be training the wrong end of the horse. What I want is to see an active swinging hind quarter and an engaged abdominal muscle lifting the lumbar spine and all the way across the top line into the stretch and into the contact that I have in the line. So with him, I gradually allow that nice, balanced, and connected trot to develop without rushing the head and neck position and allowing him to settle into where he naturally wants to go and enjoys being at. So today I decided, after seeing that balanced trot work, that we would try some canter on the lunge today. You'll see that we get a few strides and then come back to the trot and do that a few times without overdoing the transitions. And I'm doing my best there not to create stress by asking too much. And again, today I was focused mainly on maintaining the relaxed and eager attitude he was offering. Some days I would ask for a little more canter and be a little more firm in his maintaining the gait, but it depends what my goal is for the day and how the horse comes out of his paddock for any particular day. After all, you can only train the horse you have in front of you. So today was not a great canter day, maybe, but for him, I was happy with the few strides he gave me. They stayed fairly relaxed and over his back, and we will continue to develop this as time goes on. And while with Legacy, the canter has always been difficult. I wish I had a video to show you as a before sort of reference point, but basically we did not have a canter at all when I got him. He would hop behind with the back feet almost touching each other, and his back totally hollow and tense, and his head would be counterbent at 90 degrees, and the lack of balance was very stressful for him. I'm sure this difficulty at the canter comes from the physical damage to his back and his body that was done by the training he received as a halter stallion. And it's just really unfortunate, but basically I've had to start, as with most things with him, below zero with him in developing the canter, to keep his confidence and his relaxation at relatively good levels. I only do short amounts of canter on the lunge, and I try not to push it too much, or else he becomes tense and hollow, and that, of course, makes the canter even worse. So with this horse, some days I bring him out, and it's a day like this where we can only get a few good strides in, and other days he comes out and offers this beautiful canter. There have been periods, too, of course, where he has really built up his strength in his top line, and we've been able to sustain the canter long enough to develop walk-to-canter transitions and the lateral movements in the canter, and he enjoys this, especially when he is feeling physically strong and capable. I think it really helps his confidence. But on this particular day, we don't do much in the canter, just have a low intensity workout, building strength back up from a few months this past summer where I had no saddle and I was just lunging every morning. Luckily, he is a pleasure to work with on the lunge these days, and he was able to maintain an okay level of fitness during this time, and this is really the beauty of this type of work, where I can lunge my horse for a few months straight and he works nicely over his back in a way that feels good and comfortable to him, and I hop back on without further ado. And today you'll see, I think, my third or fourth ride after those few months of not having a saddle while mine was being adjusted and repaired at the time. So again, as I switch sides on the lunge, you'll see that I tried to develop that same nice swinging stretch in the walk, and as I move on to the trot, I again patiently encourage him to step underneath and across with the inside hind and let him settle more or less on his own into the connected and balanced stretch at the trot, which he does today quite nicely here to the right. Now, with this horse, the right side is always his harder side. You can see if you look closely, he's able to reach farther underneath himself with the right hind than he is with the left hind. The left hind is the one with the sock. So as many horses are, he is left bent and tends to fall onto the inside shoulder circling to the right. So it's been a bit more of a challenge both on the lunge and under saddle to really get him stepping forwards and across with the right hind away from the inside driving aided into the contact, but he is getting there. And again, in the canter in this direction, it used to be quite impossible for him to pick up the right lead at all, but now he is quite balanced in his leads. This particular day, again, it wasn't a canter day for him, but no matter, I just do exactly as I approach it to the left, where I ask for a few good strides, and then I'm happy with that for the day, and we'll continue working on it in the future. Okay, so we're moving on now to the work under saddle, and all I really did here was hop on and do the same thing and try to establish an active, swinging, free walk where he steps off my leg and into the contact. For this horse, the level of activity he offered in the walk at the very beginning was quite pleasing. As I mentioned before, the walk has always been difficult for him to maintain activity and consistency. So here I am really working on getting him to keep his nose out in front of the vertical and stretch as evenly into both hands as I can. And as I come around the corner or other times I ask him to seek the outside rein, I bring him up into a working frame. And this horse is finally coming to a point where he can stay over his back in the working frame without dropping and hollowing the lumbar spine, breaking over in the neck, and shortening the gait. And he's got this naturally high set neck, so it's easy to be fooled into thinking that he ought to carry himself in a very elevated frame. But as you see here, he is quite comfortable most of the time as I bring him up into a sort of midway point or working frame, and any higher he would lose his back. So I am happy with the way that he more or less maintains the integrity of the gait at different lengths of rein, as ideally the horse should reach for the contact with an open throat latch area and relaxed underside of the neck, and keeping the stride the same and back lifted at any length of rein. Our job, of course, as riders is to determine the length of rein appropriate for the horse's stage of development and his temperament on any given day. Now I want to make a note here on the leg yields too. He does quite alright. Ideally he would be more even in his front and back end and lateral movement. Of course, in the leg yield we do want the horse to lead with the outside shoulder, and we want the movement to be 50% forward, 50% sideways as always, but today I felt like his leg yields were often coming from the front end a little too much. I'm not too worried about it, but in the future we'll work on straightening the body using my outside rein to keep the outside shoulder from bulging out like you see it doing here. And another thing you'll maybe notice is that whenever I ask Legacy to step off my inside leg or maybe open the stride a bit or anything, really he has a tendency to alternate between coming behind the vertical and behind the hand to overcorrecting and poking his nose out, but also sort of snatching the reins or rooting, as we call it. This is partially something he came to me with and partially a mistake I made early on in his classical training. He came to me broken in the neck between the second and third vertebra with one of those like sharp angles you see in horses that have been overbent or prematurely forced to carry the head in too high of a frame. He also was trained in one of those rigs that sort of tie the nose to the chest during his life as a halter stallion, and he was lunged around in endless circles with the nose rigged up to the chest, and he learned to run around like that just behind the contact. Now this, combined with his natural sensitivity and flexibility, funny story, I call him Noodle because of this flexibility as a nickname. So this has all made it exceedingly difficult to keep this horse from coming behind the vertical. It is both a physical and emotional struggle for him to stretch out with the nose and accept the pressure of the contact. And knowing this, a year and a half ago, I used to mistakenly allow him to snatch the reins out of my hand in efforts to encourage him to poke the nose out, and I'm still guilty of making this mistake, as you'll see a few times in this video. Now, ideally, he wouldn't overcorrect like this, but I believe it came as a result of my hands as a rider not making enough of a distinction between reaching forwards and out and down and seeking the contact versus taking the reins from me on his own. He does do what I ask, which is to reach for the bit, so that is good, but I'm trying to work back and sort of fill in those holes, fix the overcorrection I made in his training, and we will eventually reach a nice middle ground where he's neither, coming behind the hand or sort of snatching the reins from my hand. And I will say we are on our way to doing that. It's got to be more time, of course, and I think that it will be something that I'll always have to be aware of, not letting him take the reins from me, and also always aware of him, continuing to seek the contact evenly and eagerly, and not coming behind the vertical as he has a tendency to do. As we move on to the trot work under saddle, I would say the transition there certainly could have been worse, but also could have been better. I try not to emphasize the quality of the transition too much because Legacy tends to, for one, overreact to the leg a little bit, and I try to abide by the classical idea that the quality of the transition reflects the gait before it. That is, in this case, if the transition from walk to trot was fluid, it means the walk had good impulsion, and the opposite is true. And again, I have done the same thing under saddle as I did on the lunge. As we begin the trot, I do not forcibly ask for the stretch right away, as I'm confident he will settle into a balanced and connected trot. And again, I do not want to focus on the head and neck before establishing evenness and activity behind, or that would, of course, be training the horse backwards. So I am okay with a neutral head position for a little bit until he settles into the stretch he feels is comfortable for him. You can see here in the leg yields at the trot, he does the same thing where he wants to curl his neck behind the vertical as he steps laterally because he is not seeking the contact with the outside rein with integrity as he should be. So in lateral movements at the trot, one of the things we ought to work on here is establishing a more solid connection with the outside rein. That way we don't lose the contact as soon as the bend changes or ask him to move off my inside leg. So we can do this by working a bit on a circle. I consider the circle to be a lateral movement itself because on the circle the horse should be in a leg yield position. That is, the inside hind should be crossing under the body and my outside hip as the rider should be open to give the rib cage and shoulders a window, so to speak, to move into, and the outside rein should limit the degree of the bend, and the horse ought to seek contact with it. I do work a bit on a circle here, and you can see I sit the trot a few strides as a check to feel that the back is lifting up. Overall, though, I could have done a bit better job establishing the outside rein at the trot, perhaps spending a little bit more time on that circle or something to that effect. So you see I do take a few walk breaks between trot because in this session, as I mentioned before, he just had a few months off of being ridden, and this is, I think, like I said, our third or fourth ride back from that break of just lunging, so it will take a little bit for him to redevelop his endurance, and I'm happy to give him walk breaks in between trotting so long as the walk remains active and the back stays lifted throughout. And you can also see that as I take my walk break, I do a few more leg yields at the walk, trying again to get him to be moving into that outside rein. And you can see that after he's loosened up a bit at the trot, and we've gotten a little bit farther in the session, his lateral movements at the walk have improved, and he's staying straighter and better between the aids as I do a few more leg yields here. I also want to point out something about that change of bend across the diagonal we just saw. I like to take the opportunity to use that change of bend to be sure that I can, as the rider, switch from one diagonal position to the other, and the horse responds well and with lightness to that change of bend. I didn't do it much here, but sometimes I'll do a bit of a leg yield on both sides of the change of bend as an exercise there, so the horse ought to be, stepping into the open outside hip, and then as I switch my diagonal position, the horse should, change the bend and be moving into the other outside hip. And well, the indoor arena, as you see, is a bit small, so you have to get creative here sometimes, especially in the cold winter months that we've got. So I've picked up the trot again here, and for the remainder of the video, I'm kind of working on alternating between the stretch and the working gait in the trot. Now, like I mentioned, this horse is just now coming into both a mental and physical point at which we can start to really firmly establish the working gaits. Of course, I've brought him up before, and we've gotten to points where we can sustain the working gaits before, but we've kind of turned over a new leaf in his training in the sense that I feel more like there's more integrity to the working gait, and he has more of an ability and a willingness to really seek the contact with the open underside of the neck. And so you can see here as I come around the circle to the left, I am alternating between the stretch and the working gait, and I'm trying my best to pick up the reins gradually and have him follow my hands inch by inch. And then, I try to do the same thing as he lowers back into the stretch, but as I mentioned before, he does have that tendency to sort of, snatch the reins out of my hands or root and such like that, and that's due to my own mistakes. So that's something we're trying to fix, where ideally you want the horse to chew the reins out of your hands, or they say also we want to show the horse the way to the ground. So from the working gait, ideally I should be able to lengthen the rein centimeter by centimeter and have the horse follow it with the nose poking out, with the neck open on the underside, and then maintaining the rhythm, maintaining the impulsion, etc. So we're working on that, but for now I am pleased that the working gait is something that we can work on developing and sustaining. So I've switched directions here now, and I am trotting to the right, and I'm going to do the same thing that I just did to the left, where I try to establish the working gait for just a few strides, and then we go back down to the stretch and then back up to the working gait. And this is quite good physically for the horse. It's also good for the training, for the establishing, the correct relationship with the rein and the hand that the horse should have. And you can see it's a little bit more difficulty on this side, but no matter, I just make the sessions or stride numbers of working trot a little bit shorter. It's the end of the session, and like I said before, the right side is harder, and what I do as I begin to bring the horse up is I ask for the horse to move more and more into the outside rein as I shorten the rein. That way, ideally, the horse is stepping under with the inside hind and lifting the back into the outside rein even more as we shorten the rein, and he has less of a chance of curling behind. And as I stated before, the right side's a little bit harder for him to do that lateral movement, so naturally, the working gait is going to be a bit trickier on this side as well. But I think he does a fairly good job, and like I said before, I still want him to be a little bit more respectful of the length of rein when I do let him out into the stretch. I feel like he's sort of taking the reins from me when he really should be, lowering, as I let him. But overall, I would say the session was a pretty good one for him. He stayed very relaxed, and we got some good lateral work in. Our transitions need work, but they'll get there. And again, I'm quite pleased with the level of relaxation, with his eagerness in the work, his attitude that was maintained throughout the session. Really good for this horse, especially considering where he came from. And it's always such a nice feeling, to have that nice, even, balanced, connected trot toward the end there. All right, and so that's the end of my session. Thanks so much for watching. Stay tuned for my second submission here in the next couple of months. Again, this is Sam and my Rescue Arabian Legacy with Art2Ride. Thank you.